The card was yellowed at the edges, typed on what must have been a manual typewriter. Each letter slightly offset, the E's punched through the paper. Elias found it tucked inside the circulation desk drawer his first night, beneath a ring of tarnished keys and a packet of throat lozenges that had fused into a single chalky mass. Silence protocol. Night librarian duties midnight to 6 a.m. Astor Central Library. Lower stacks. 7 rules followed, numbered in faded blue ink. Elias had laughed, actually laughed, turning the card over in his hands under the weak glow of the desk lamp. The Astor Central Library was a monument to municipal neglect, a 19th century edifice of dark wood and bronze railings that the city kept open purely out of bureaucratic inertia. The day staff treated it like a mausoleum. The night shift was punishment duty, reserved for the desperate or the foolish. Elias was both. His degree in library science had earned him exactly one job offer: $18 an hour to sit alone in a building that smelled of mildew and old glue, ensuring no one stole the outdated reference materials. The lower stacks, 3 basement levels of closed collections, hadn't been properly cataloged since 1987. No one came here at night. No one came here during the day either. He'd pinned the card to the corkboard behind the desk, next to the fire evacuation map and a photocopied memo about acceptable breakroom conduct. A historical oddity. Maybe something to show his friends, proof that this place was exactly as weird as it looked. That was 11 hours ago. Now it was 11:47 p.m., and Elias sat at the circulation desk with his phone face down, listening to the building settle around him. The overhead lights in the main reading room had been dimmed per the closing checklist. The bronze railings gleamed dully in the shadows. Beyond the main floor, the entrance to the lower stacks gaped like a mouth, a stairwell descending into darkness that his flashlight couldn't quite penetrate. The card stared at him from the corkboard. He'd read it a dozen times during his shift, each reading making the words feel less like a joke. The rules were too specific, too procedural. They had the cadence of something that had been revised, tested, refined through trial and error, through failure. Elias checked his watch. 11:51 p.m., 9 minutes until midnight. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, too loud in the silence, and walked to the microfiche reader mounted on a small table beside the desk. It was an ancient machine, beige plastic yellowed to the color of old teeth, the kind of equipment that should have been in a museum. He'd noticed it earlier but assumed it was decorative, a relic no one had bothered to remove. Now he flipped the power switch. The machine hummed to life with a low, steady drone, not unpleasant, like distant machinery or the white noise of an air conditioner. The sound filled the reading room, a bass line that made the silence less absolute. Rule 1. The cataloging hum. The microfiche reader at the front desk must remain powered on from midnight until 6 a.m. The hum must be continuous and uninterrupted. If the hum stops for any reason, the watchers will announce their presence with 3 slow knocks on the nearest wooden surface. Do not respond to the knocking. Restore the hum immediately. Elias checked the power cord. Secure. He traced it to the wall outlet, made sure the connection was tight. The machine was old, probably prone to shorts or failures. If the power cut out, he shook his head. The rules were someone's idea of atmosphere, probably written by a bored night librarian decades ago. He was working himself up over nothing. His watch read 11:58 p.m. Elias returned to the desk and sat down, pulling the card from the corkboard to read it again by the light of the lamp. The paper felt heavier than it should, as if the words themselves had weight. Rule 2. The impossible call at 1:30 a.m. The telephone on the circulation desk will ring. You must answer before the 3rd ring. The caller will request a book that cannot exist. You must respond with the exact phrase, "That title is not available in our current reality." Do not deviate from this phrase. Do not engage in conversation. Hang up immediately after speaking. The telephone sat beside the lamp, an old rotary model with a cloth-wrapped cord. Elias had checked it earlier. No dial tone, no connection. The library had switched to a digital system years ago. This phone was a prop, like the microfiche reader, except the microfiche reader was humming. 11:59 p.m. Elias set the card down and folded his hands on the desk, watching the second hand of the wall clock sweep toward 12. His heart was beating faster than it should. The reading room felt larger in the darkness, the high ceiling lost in shadow, the rows of shelves extending into a gloom that his eyes couldn't quite penetrate. The second hand reached 12, midnight. The lights flickered, just once, so brief Elias almost missed it, and the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had opened a freezer door. His breath misted in front of his face. The hum of the microfiche reader continued, steady and unchanged. Elias waited. Nothing happened. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and laughed, a short, nervous sound that died quickly in the cold air. This was ridiculous. He was sitting in an empty library, scaring himself with a list of rules that someone had. A sound echoed from the lower stacks. Not a crash, not a bang. A soft thump, like a book falling flat on a surface. Elias froze. The sound had come from below, from one of the closed levels where the old collections were stored. The stairwell entrance was maybe 30 feet away, a rectangle of deeper darkness against the shadows of the main floor. He stared at it, waiting for another sound. Silence. Then faint and distant, another thump. Elias picked up his flashlight and stood, his legs stiff. He walked to the edge of the circulation desk, peering toward the stairwell. The beam of his flashlight caught the brass handrail. The first few steps descending into the dark. Rule 3, the book retrieval. If you hear a book fall in the lower stacks, you must retrieve it. You may only move through the stacks when the lights are off. To turn off the stack lights, pull the red emergency switch located at the top of the stairwell. The lights will remain off for exactly 3 minutes before automatically restoring. If the lights flash on while you are moving, you will see the watchers standing between the shelves. Do not look at their faces. Do not run. Freeze until the lights go off again, then complete your retrieval and return to the main floor. Elias read the rule 3 times, his flashlight beam shaking slightly. This was insane. He should call someone, his supervisor, the police, anyone. But his phone had no signal down here, and the landline at the desk was disconnected. He was alone. Another thump from below. He crossed to the stairwell, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. At the top of the stairs, mounted on the wall, was a red switch in a metal housing, the kind used for emergency lighting cutoffs. His hand hovered over it. If he pulled it, he'd be in complete darkness. The lower stacks had no windows, no emergency lighting, just rows and rows of shelves extending through 3 basement levels. Elias pulled the switch. The hum of the microfiche reader continued behind him, constant, reassuring, but every other light in the library went out. The darkness was absolute, a physical presence that pressed against his eyes. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam seemed weaker now, swallowed by the dark. He descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing. The air grew colder with each step, and damp. He could smell mold and old paper, decades of neglect. The stairwell opened onto the first basement level, a low-ceilinged space packed with metal shelving units that stretched into the darkness like a maze. Elias swept his flashlight across the nearest shelves. Old books, their spines cracked and faded. Journals, bound newspapers, everything covered in a fine layer of dust that muffled sound. Where had the book fallen? He walked between the shelves, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The silence was oppressive now, broken only by his breathing and the soft scuff of his shoes on concrete. No air circulation, no ambient city noise, just thump. To his left, deeper in the stacks. Elias turned, his flashlight catching a gap between 2 shelving units. He squeezed through, his jacket scraping against the metal frames, and emerged in a narrow aisle. A book lay on the floor, face up. He approached slowly, crouched, and picked it up. The cover was leather, unmarked, no title, no author. He opened it to the first page, angling his flashlight. The text was handwritten in ink that had faded to brown. Elias Grant, Night Librarian, Shift 1. His name. His hand trembled, and the book nearly slipped from his grip. This wasn't possible. He'd never seen this book before, never written. The lights flashed on, not the gentle glow of normal lighting, but a harsh, stuttering fluorescence that turned the stacks into a nightmare of sharp shadows and overexposed surfaces. The bulbs buzzed loudly, an angry insect sound that filled the space, and between the shelves, standing perfectly still, were figures. They looked human, almost. The proportions were right, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But they were out of focus, as if Elias were looking at them through a smeared lens. Their clothes were wrong, styles from different eras layered impossibly. Victorian coats over 1970s slacks, modern jeans with Depression-era caps. Their faces were blurred, features suggested but never quite resolving. There were 5 of them visible in his immediate area. More in the distance, standing in the aisles between shelves, motionless, the watchers. Elias's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but the rule had been specific: freeze, do not look at their faces, do not run. He stood absolutely still, the book clutched in one hand, his flashlight in the other. The watchers didn't move. They simply stood there, watching him with faces he couldn't quite see. The lights stuttered, flickered, and went out. Darkness crashed back like a wave. Elias gasped, his heart hammering, and swept his flashlight across the aisle. Empty. The watchers were gone. He didn't wait. He turned and ran, the book tucked under his arm, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly as he navigated the maze of shelves. The stairwell appeared ahead, and he took the steps 2 at a time, emerging onto the main floor just as the lights flickered back on. Normal lighting, warm and steady. The microfiche reader hummed peacefully at the circulation desk. Elias collapsed into his chair, breathing hard, and set the book on the desk. His hands were shaking. The cover stared up at him, blank and accusing. He didn't open it again. The wall clock read 12:47 a.m., 43 minutes until the phone call. Elias made coffee in the break room, a small space off the main floor with a sink, a microwave, and a refrigerator that wheezed like an asthmatic. He needed the caffeine, needed something normal to ground himself. The book sat on the circulation desk where he'd left it. He'd checked it twice more, his name on the first page, followed by blank pages. Hundreds of them, cream-colored and empty, waiting to be filled. With what? The coffee maker gurgled, and Elias rubbed his face, trying to think. He could leave. Just walk out the front doors, lock them behind him, and never come back. Fuck the job, fuck the paycheck. This wasn't worth. But the rules had worked. That was the thing gnawing at him. He'd followed Rule 3 exactly, and he'd survived. The watchers had appeared when the lights came on, just as the rule predicted. They hadn't attacked, hadn't moved, because he'd frozen. The system worked, which meant the other rules were real too. Elias poured his coffee and returned to the desk, checking the wall clock. 1:18 a.m., 12 minutes until the phone rang. He sat down, cradling the mug in both hands, and stared at the old rotary phone. The caller will request a book that cannot exist. What did that mean? A book from the future, a book that contradicted itself, the complete history of tomorrow. That had been the example, but the rule suggested the request could vary. You must respond with the exact phrase, "That title is not available in our current reality." Elias repeated it under his breath, committing it to memory. No deviation, no conversation. 1:24 a.m. He set down his coffee and pulled out his phone. Still no signal. He tried the library's wireless network. No connection. The building might as well have been a dead zone, cut off from the world. 128 mm. The reading room was absolutely silent, except for the hum of the microfiche reader. The sound had become comforting, a lifeline of normalcy in a night that had gone completely wrong. 130 mm. The phone rang. The sound was shockingly loud, a mechanical bring that cut through the silence like a blade. Elias stared at the phone for 1 ring, 2 rings, his hand hovering over the receiver. Before the 3rd ring, he picked up. "Astor's Central Library," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Silence on the other end. Then a voice, calm, professional, utterly without inflection. "Yes, hello. I'm looking for a copy of the Dictionary of Words That Have Never Been Spoken. Do you have that in your collection?" Elias's mouth went dry. A dictionary of words that had never been spoken, impossible by definition. The moment a word was defined, it was spoken. The book couldn't exist. He recited the phrase exactly. "That title is not available in our current reality." "I see," the voice said. "Thank you for checking." The line went dead. Elias hung up, his hand trembling. The phone sat silent on the desk, as if the call had never happened. He checked the time, 1:31 a.m. 2 rules down, 5 to go. At 2:15 a.m., Elias walked the perimeter of the main floor, stretching his legs, trying to stay awake. The coffee had helped, but exhaustion was creeping in. Not physical tiredness, but a mental fog brought on by stress and adrenaline crash. The reading room looked different at night. The shadows between the shelves seemed deeper, and the bronze railings caught the light in strange ways, casting patterns that looked almost like figures. He kept his distance from the stairwell to the lower stacks. The door was closed now. He'd shut it after his return, but he could feel the weight of the space below, all those books and shelves in darkness. And the watchers, were they still down there, waiting? The wall clock read 2:47 a.m., 13 minutes until Rule 4 came into play. Elias returned to the circulation desk and read the rule again. Rule 4, the lost patron at 3 a.m. A single patron will appear in the fiction section. They will look normal, fully in focus, dressed in contemporary clothing. They will stand perfectly still, facing the shelves. You must not acknowledge them. Do not speak to them. Do not make eye contact. If you meet their gaze, they will ask you a question. If you answer, you will become a lost patron yourself, and a new night librarian will be required. Elias looked up at the fiction section, a cluster of shelves in the northeast corner of the reading room. From his position at the desk, he had a clear line of sight. The area was empty. 2:53 a.m. He considered his options. He could hide in the break room, avoid the entire situation. But the rules didn't say he could leave the main floor. In fact, Rule 6 specifically mentioned staying vigilant. He had to be present. He just couldn't interact. 2:58 a.m. Elias positioned himself at the desk, angling his chair so he could see the fiction section in his peripheral vision without looking directly at it. He picked up a book at random, a battered copy of The Old Man and the Sea, and pretended to read, his eyes on the pages, but his attention focused on the corner of the room. 3 m. The lights flickered. When they steadied, there was someone standing in the fiction section. A woman, maybe 30, wearing jeans and a cardigan. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She stood with her back to Elias, facing the shelves, completely still. She looked absolutely normal, alive, real. Elias kept his eyes on his book, his peripheral vision tracking her. She didn't move, didn't browse the shelves, didn't pull out a book, just stood there. Minutes passed. Elias's neck began to ache from the awkward angle, but he didn't adjust. The woman remained motionless. 3:07 m. His eyes drifted, just for a second, a reflexive glance, and he caught sight of her face in profile. She was looking at him. Her head had turned slowly and silently, and now her eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Her expression was neutral, but her gaze was a physical thing. a weight pressing against him. Elias jerked his eyes back to the book, his heart pounding. "Don't make eye contact. Don't engage." "Excuse me," the woman said. Her voice was pleasant, conversational. "Could you help me find something?" Elias didn't respond. He stared at the pages of The Old Man and the Sea, the words swimming in his vision. "I'm looking for a book," she continued. "It's very important. Could you help me?" He gripped the book tighter, his knuckles white. "Please," she said. "I just need a moment of your time." Silence. Elias sat frozen at the desk, every muscle locked, willing himself not to respond, not to look up, not to acknowledge her existence. The air in the reading room felt thick, oppressive. "I understand," the woman said softly. When Elias finally dared to glance toward the fiction section, 5 minutes later, 10, he lost track. She was gone. At 3:45 a.m., Elias went to the break room to splash water on his face. The exhaustion was bone deep now, but he couldn't risk falling asleep. 3 more hours. He could make it. The break room was exactly as he'd left it. The sink with its dripping faucet, the microwave with its cracked door, the refrigerator humming tunelessly. And above the sink, covered by a piece of cardboard taped to the wall, the mirror. Rule 5. The reflection the mirror above the break room sink must remain covered at all times. If you uncover the mirror and look into it, your reflection will move independently of you. It will mouth the word "stay" 3 times. On the 3rd repetition, it will press its hands against the glass from the inside. Do not touch the mirror. Recover it immediately. If you speak to your reflection, it will offer to take your place. Do not accept. Elias stared at the cardboard. The tape was old, yellowed, but it held firm. Part of him wanted to leave it alone, to take the rule at face value. But another part of him, the skeptical part, the part that had laughed at the rules card, needed to know. He reached up and peeled back one corner of the cardboard. The mirror underneath was small, cracked, the silvering worn in spots. His face looked back at him, haggard and pale in the fluorescent light of the break room. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his reflection blinked. Elias hadn't blinked. His reflection's mouth moved, forming a word, "stay." Elias felt his breath catch. His reflection repeated the word, more emphatic now, its lips exaggerating the shape, "stay." A 3rd time, "stay." On the 3rd repetition, his reflection's hands came up, slowly, deliberately, and pressed flat against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled like water, and Elias could see the palms, the fingers, pressing outward as if the mirror were a membrane that could tear. His reflection's eyes met his, and its mouth moved again, forming different words. "I can take your place. You can leave. Let me out." Elias slammed the cardboard back over the mirror and stumbled backward, his shoulders hitting the refrigerator. His heart felt like it would burst through his ribs. The break room was silent. He left, pulling the door closed behind him, and returned to the circulation desk on shaking legs. The wall clock read 3:52 m. 2 hours left, 2 rules left. At 4:30 a.m., Elias heard the sound of a key turning in the front doors. The main entrance to the Astor Central Library was a double door of heavy oak with brass fixtures, locked from the inside with a deadbolt and chain. Elias had checked the locks twice during his shift. Per protocol, now he heard the distinct scrape of metal on metal, a key slide into the exterior lock. He stood, his chair scraping back, and stared at the entrance. From his position at the circulation desk, he could see the doors clearly. The chain was still in place. The deadbolt was still thrown. But the handle was turning. Slowly, from the outside, someone was trying to open the doors. Rule 6, the exit test. The main doors must remain locked from midnight until 6 a.m. If you see or hear someone attempting to unlock the doors from the outside, do not approach, do not open the doors. Instead, immediately turn on the red emergency light in the main reading room. This light is located on the northeast pillar. The entity outside will leave when the light is activated. Elias ran to the northeast corner of the reading room, where a thick support pillar rose to the ceiling. Mounted on the side facing the entrance was a red emergency light, the kind used in theaters or hospitals, a bulb inside a wire cage with a pull chain. He yanked the chain. The red light blazed to life, bathing the reading room in a crimson glow that turned the shadows into blood. At the front doors, the handle stopped moving. Elias waited, his breath coming in short gasps, watching the entrance. The handle slowly returned to its resting position. Silence. He waited another full minute before crossing back to the northeast pillar and pulling the chain again, extinguishing the red light. The reading room returned to its normal dimness. When he returned to the circulation desk, the wall clock read 4:38 m.m., 1 hour and 22 minutes until the end of his shift, one rule left. At 5:30 a.m., Elias began to allow himself to hope. He'd survived. 6 rules down, and he was still here, still himself. The final rule wasn't due until 5:58 m.m. Just a procedural task, placing his name tag on the new arrivals cart. He could do that. He could finish this. The reading room was still and quiet, the microfiche reader humming its steady bass line. The book with his name on it sat on the desk, untouched since his return from the lower stacks. He hadn't opened it again. Didn't want to know what else might be written inside. At 5:45 a.m., Elias stood and stretched, his joints popping. 13 minutes left. He walked to the front windows, peering out at the street beyond. Darkness. No street lights, no passing cars. The world outside the library seemed empty, as if the building existed in a pocket of space, disconnected from the city. Or maybe the city was disconnected from the building. 5:50 m.m. Elias returned to the desk and unpinned his name tag from his shirt. It was a simple plastic badge with his name printed on a label. Elias Grant, Night Librarian. The new arrivals cart sat near the circulation desk, a metal rack on wheels loaded with books that had been returned during the day shift. He'd noticed it earlier but hadn't paid it much attention. Now he looked at it more closely. The books on the cart weren't new arrivals. They were old, leather-bound, cloth-covered, their spines cracked and faded. Some had no titles. Others had names printed in gilt letters too worn to read. 5:55 m.m. Elias held his name tag, turning it over in his hands. Rule 7. The final rule at 5:58 a.m. You must remove your name tag and place it on the new arrivals cart. Turn the name tag over before placing it. Read the instruction written on the back. This instruction confirms your integration into the silence protocol. Do not deviate from the instruction. Your shift ends at 6 a.m. He flipped the name tag over. On the back, written in the same faded blue ink as the rules card, was a single sentence. You are now part of the collection. Welcome the next librarian. Elias's hands went numb. Integration. The instruction confirms your integration. He looked up at the wall clock. 5:57 m. His mind raced. Integration into what? The collection, the watchers. You are now part of the collection. The figures in the lower stacks. The woman in the fiction section. His reflection in the mirror. They had all been librarians once, he realized. They had all sat at this desk, followed these rules, and at the end of their shift they had 5:58 a.m. Elias placed the name tag on the new arrivals cart, the instruction facing up. He stepped back, his heart hammering, waiting for something to happen. A transformation, a pulling sensation, pain, nothing. The reading room remained unchanged. The microfiche reader hummed. The wall clock ticked forward, 5:59 a.m. 1 minute until his shift ended. Elias walked to the front windows and looked out, desperate for a sign of the coming dawn, for headlights or streetlights, or any indication that the world outside still existed. The street was full of figures. They stood on the sidewalk, on the steps leading to the library entrance, clustered in groups or alone. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all perfectly still, facing the building. The watchers, but they weren't blurred anymore. They were in focus, sharp, clear, their faces visible for the first time. Elias recognized some of them. The woman from the fiction section stood in the front row, her expression neutral. Beside her was a man in a Victorian coat, his hands clasped behind his back. Others wore clothing from different eras, different decades, all standing together in silent vigil. They were waiting. The wall clock chimed. 6 a.m. Elias's shift was over. He turned from the window, his legs moving without conscious thought, and walked to the circulation desk. The microfiche reader's hum cut off, abruptly, finally, and the silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute. The rules card sat on the corkboard, exactly where he'd left it. Elias unpinned it and held it up to the light. The 7 rules were still there, typed in that slightly offset font. But now, at the bottom of the card, an 8th line had appeared, written in the same faded blue ink as the instruction on his name tag, Shift 1 complete. Prepare the desk for the next librarian. He set the card down, his hands steady now, and began tidying the desk. He returned the book with his name on it to the new arrivals cart, placing it carefully on top of the other volumes. He straightened the stack of blank checkout cards. He adjusted the lamp so its light fell evenly across the work surface. When he finished, he walked to the front doors and stood beside them, his back to the wall facing the circulation desk. The main reading room looked exactly as it had when he'd arrived 12 hours ago. The dark wood, the bronze railings, the rows of shelves extending into shadow, clean, orderly, waiting. Outside, the watchers remained motionless. Elias understood now. They weren't trying to get in. They were standing guard, maintaining the silence, ensuring the protocol continued. He was one of them now. At 6:15 a.m. the front doors opened. A young woman entered, maybe 25, carrying a backpack and a travel mug of coffee. She looked around the reading room with the expression of someone seeing the space for the first time, her eyes wide and uncertain. The new night librarian. She approached the circulation desk, set down her backpack and pulled open the drawer. Her hand emerged holding the yellowed card, and she read it under the light of the lamp, her lips moving silently. Elias watched from his position by the door. The woman looked up, scanning the reading room, and her gaze passed right through him, over him, around him, as if he were just another shadow among the shelves. She couldn't see him. None of them could. Not yet. Not until they broke a rule, or completed their shift, or looked too closely at the things that moved in the corners of their vision. The woman pinned the card to the corkboard and sat down at the desk, checking her watch. She glanced at the microfiche reader, frowning, then reached out and flipped the power switch. The hum filled the reading room once more. Elias turned and walked through the front doors, passing through the wood as if it were mist, and joined the others outside. The watchers stood in their vigil, facing the library, waiting. And Elias Grant, night librarian, Shift 1, took his place among them, perfectly still, finally in focus, ready to welcome the next keeper of the silence.